Title: How My Wife Stole Years of My Life. Until a DNA test exposed the truth and justice was finally served. I never expected to walk through my front door and have my entire life ripped apart in an instant. But that's exactly what happened. Emily stood there, arms crossed, her face expressionless except for a coldness in her eyes I had never seen before. I want a divorce. For words. For words that felt like a dagger straight to the chest. I just stood there, staring at her, waiting for some sort of explanation. But none came. We had our issues. What couple didn't? Sure, we argued more than usual lately, stress piling up over bills, work, and just life. But I thought we were working through it like we always had. Never in my wildest dreams did I think she had already made up her mind. We had been together for nearly 7 years, married for 5. And then there was Lucy, our 4-year-old daughter, the single greatest thing to come out of my life. My little girl, my reason for pushing through even the hardest days. And now, in one breath, Emily was ready to tear it all apart like it meant nothing. At first, I thought I could reason with her. Maybe she just needed space, time to think things through. But when she laid out her terms, I knew there was no fixing this. She wanted everything: the house, the car, and worst of all, child support. It made no sense. I was already covering nearly every expense. Mortgage, car payments, groceries. I worked myself to the bone to make sure my family was comfortable. And now, she wanted it legally enforced like I was some deadbeat who had to be forced to take care of his own kid. Then came the real gut punch. She wanted to limit my time with Lucy. We had agreed on a fair arrangement. Lucy would spend every weekend with me. But suddenly, Emily decided that wasn't good enough. She wanted me down to 2 weekends a month. Just 4 days total. I couldn't believe it. Lucy was my world. How could Emily even think of keeping her from me like that? I fought. I argued. I reminded Emily of all the nights I had stayed up rocking Lucy to sleep when she was a baby, all the times I had been the one to take care of her when she was sick. None of it mattered. Emily had already made up her mind, and I could see it in her face. This wasn't about what was best for Lucy. This was about control. The first time, she dropped Lucy off after our agreement. The tension was suffocating. Emily barely looked at me as she handed over Lucy's bag like she was passing off a package. She still had that smug, resentful expression on her face, like she was the one who had been wronged, like I was just some nuisance she had to deal with. And before she left, she had the nerve to tell me, "Don't let her stay up too late," as if she was still running the show in my own home. Then, she turned and walked away without a single goodbye. I wanted to scream, to demand why she was doing this to me. But I swallowed it down, because the moment Lucy ran into my arms, giggling, her little fingers wrapping around my shirt, none of that mattered. I still had my daughter, and I wasn't going to waste a second of my time with her on anger. But Emily wasn't done making my life hell. After the divorce was finalized, reality set in. Balancing full-time work and full-time fatherhood was exhausting. I was already stretched thin, but I refused to let my time with Lucy suffer. Then, my worst nightmare became real. I lost my job. 15 years of hard work, early mornings, late nights, sacrificing time with my family to climb the corporate ladder. Gone. My boss sat me down, gave me the whole speech about tough decisions and company cutbacks, but none of it mattered. At the end of the day, I was just another name on a list. And suddenly, I was unemployed with child support payments still hanging over my head. Losing my job was just the beginning of my downfall. I scrambled to find work. I spent hours online, sent out applications, and called every contact I had. Nothing. The options I found wouldn't even cover my rent, let alone child support. Still, I tried. I picked up part-time jobs, worked under-the-table gigs just to keep the money coming in. But it wasn't enough. Then the inevitable happened. I missed a payment. I told myself I'd catch up, that I just needed a little more time. But Emily wasn't interested in patience. The moment that payment was late, she was on the phone screaming at me. I tried to explain, but she didn't care. And then, just a few days later, there was a loud knock at my door. 6 a.m. I knew before I even answered. 2 officers stood outside, serious expressions on their faces. I barely had time to process what was happening before I was in handcuffs. They read me my rights, but my mind was already elsewhere. Lucy. How was I supposed to explain this to her? I had done everything I could to hold my life together, and yet, here I was, arrested like a criminal because I couldn't afford to pay money I never should have owed in the first place. By the time I was processed and thrown into a holding cell, all I felt was numb. 2 days. 2 days of sitting on a cold bench, staring at a wall, surrounded by men who had actually committed crimes. 2 days of wondering how Emily must have been celebrating, thinking she had finally won. Then, on one of the worst days of my life, a letter arrived. It was from Brandon, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. I opened it, expecting some empty words of encouragement. But what I read made my blood turn to ice. Brandon knew the truth. Emily had been cheating on me for years. And then, the final blow. There was a good chance Lucy wasn't even mine. I felt my entire world tilt. I had spent 4 years loving, raising, and fighting for a little girl who might not even be my own. My hands clenched the letter so tightly I almost tore it apart. I had been lied to, used, cheated out of my life, my future, and now, possibly even my fatherhood. I knew what I had to do. The moment I got out, I was getting a DNA test. No matter how much it hurt, I needed the truth. Because if Emily had been using me this whole time, she was going to pay. The day I walked out of that jail cell, I wasn't the same man who had walked in. I had been humiliated, stripped of everything I worked for, tossed aside like my life meant nothing. But worst of all, I had spent 4 years loving a little girl who might not even be mine, all while the woman I had once trusted had been lying to me with a straight face. The moment I got home, I didn't waste any time. I called my lawyer and told him everything. The letter from Brandon, the years of deception, and most importantly, my need for a paternity test. My lawyer, who had already been fighting to adjust my child support due to my unemployment, agreed immediately. We filed the necessary paperwork, and within a week, a court-mandated paternity test was scheduled. The test that changed everything. The day I arrived at the clinic, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might tear through my chest. Emily was already there, sitting stiffly in the waiting area with Lucy beside her. Her arms were crossed, her jaw tight. She didn't say a word to me when I walked in. She just stared. Lucy, on the other hand, ran toward me with the same excitement she always had, her tiny arms wrapping around my waist. That moment nearly broke me. I had spent years rocking this little girl to sleep, wiping her tears, holding her when she was scared. She looked up at me with so much love, and for the first time, I questioned whether I even wanted to know the truth. What if the test confirmed my worst fear? Would I still be able to love her the same way? Would she still be my daughter in my heart, even if she wasn't mine by blood? I closed my eyes for a second, forcing the thoughts away. I had come too far to back out now. Emily finally spoke as I sat down across from her. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, shaking her head. "You're making a mistake." I clenched my fists under the table. "No, you made the mistake, Emily. I'm just cleaning up the mess." She scoffed, but she didn't argue, because deep down, she knew I was right. The nurse came in and called us back. Lucy was first, her little mouth opening without hesitation as they swabbed her cheek. Then me, then Emily for legal verification. And just like that, the test was done. 2 weeks. That's how long they said it would take. 14 days of torture. 14 days of lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the answer would mean for my life. Would I lose Lucy forever? Or had I been worrying for nothing? The truth is revealed. The envelope arrived on a Friday afternoon. I sat at my kitchen table, the white paper trembling in my hands. My heart was racing so hard I could barely breathe. Then I ripped it open, and the number hit me like a freight train. 0%. Lucy wasn't mine. The paper slipped from my fingers and floated to the floor. I sat there, staring at it, feeling like someone had ripped out my insides. I had prepared myself for this possibility, told myself I was ready for any outcome. But I was wrong, because nothing in the world could have prepared me for that kind of pain. For years of loving this little girl like she was my flesh and blood, believing she was my world, only to find out she had never been mine to begin with. Emily had lied to me, used me, stolen from me, and worst of all, She had let me love a child that she knew wasn't mine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, numb, while the walls of my life collapsed around me. Then, slowly, the numbness turned to anger. Emily wasn't going to get away with this. The battle in court. The very next morning, I called my lawyer. "I want to sue," I told him, my voice cold and steady. "For what?" he asked. "For fraud, for emotional damage, and for every damn dollar of child support I paid for a child that isn't mine." My lawyer didn't even hesitate. "We have a case?" We filed immediately. The court date was set for a month later, and by then, I was ready to fight. When the day arrived, I walked into that courtroom with my head high. Emily was already there, looking polished and put together, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew she had screwed up. The judge listened as my lawyer laid it all out. The DNA test results proving I wasn't Lucy's father. The letter from Brandon confirming Emily's infidelity. The years of child support payments she had collected, all while knowing the truth. Then came the real bombshell. Emily hadn't just lied to me. She had been collecting 2 child support payments, one from me and another from Lucy's real father. She had played both of us. When that information was presented, the entire courtroom went silent. Emily's face turned pale. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing she could say. She was caught. The verdict that changed everything. The judge didn't hold back. Emily was found guilty of fraud. She was ordered to pay back every cent of the child support I had given her over the years. And as if that wasn't enough, the judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison. The moment those words left his mouth, I finally felt it: justice. I had spent years suffering, being manipulated, losing everything, all because of her. And now, she was the one paying the price. But even with that victory, there was still one problem. Lucy, the hardest decision of my life. Because Emily was going to prison, Lucy needed a guardian. Her biological father, Cole, wanted nothing to do with her. He hadn't stepped up before, and he wasn't stepping up now. So the judge turned to me. Legally, I had no obligation to Lucy anymore. I could have walked away, wiped my hands clean, and left that entire chapter behind. But as I sat there, staring at the little girl who had called me daddy for 4 years, I knew I couldn't. Lucy may not have been my blood, but she was still my daughter, and I wasn't going to let her suffer for her mother's mistakes. So when the judge asked if I wanted to fight for custody, I looked him in the eye and said yes. Emily had lied, stolen, and destroyed my life, but the one good thing that had come from it all was Lucy, and I refused to abandon her. A new beginning. Leaving that courtroom, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, closure, sadness. I had won the battle, but I had also lost something I could never get back: the belief that my life had been real. But one thing was certain: I would fight for Lucy. She may not have been mine by blood, but she would always be my daughter, and I would never let her go.